Now look what happens in verse 9. Now we move to the story of what went on with Joseph. And the patriarchs, verse 9, becoming envious, sold Joseph into Egypt. But God was with him and delivered him out of all his troubles and gave him favor and wisdom in the presence of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he made him governor over Egypt and all his house. Now a famine and great trouble came over all the land of Egypt and Canaan, and our fathers found no sustenance. Verse 12, but when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent out our fathers first. And the second time Joseph made known to his brothers, and Joseph's family became known to the Pharaoh. Then Joseph sent and called his father Jacob and all of his relatives to him, 75 people. So Jacob went down to Egypt, and he died, he and our fathers. And they were carried back to Shechem and laid in a tomb that Abraham bought for a sum of money from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. So now we get, this all comes from the end of the book of Genesis, probably about the last 10 chapters, about 40 to 50. We get the story of Joseph. Now notice he begins that the patriarchs became envious and sold Joseph into Egypt, but God was with him. See, remember Joseph was Jacob's favorite son, the firstborn, who was born to Rachel, who Jacob loved, the one who he wanted to marry, but her father did a little bait and switch, and he ended up with Leah instead of Rachel. That's why if you ever go to a wedding, you'll notice they'll take the veil back before they say the vows now. That the reason they do that, and you remember that, because what happened was, you have to realize that back in that culture, the woman wore much stronger veils, a lot like the burqas that you see in Muslim countries. So the women were veiled, so you might say, how did Jacob marry this woman he didn't even know he was, and then the next morning when he woke up, they didn't have, it was a different culture then. So that's why now women walk down with a veil, but then when you get down to the front, you pull the veil back. And notice the veil, you can see right through it. We're happy. But nothing worse than thinking you're marrying one sister and getting the other sister. That's exactly what happened. For Jacob, it was a bummer deal, and you read the book of Genesis, you can't even make this stuff up. That's like a baby race. Who's going to have the most babies? You read that stuff, it's like, that could be a reality TV show today. You'd be like, this is awesome. It's like, Leah's having all the babies, Rachel's not having, so she gives him her handmaiden, and she starts having babies. And the other one, well, hey, I can give him mine, and Jacob must have been exhausted by the end of this whole thing. I can't even imagine. And 4 wives. My goodness. Can you imagine Valentine's Day in that house? Okay. Anyway, let's keep moving. So Joseph was the one who Jacob's heart was tied to, because it was Rachel's first son. And Joseph was having these dreams about all of the sheep bowing down to him. And everyone just, what are you talking about? And his brothers were envious. His father preferred him, and they were envious. Why do you think Stephen makes that point? That's exactly what he's going to say to David, Jesus. That the Father God preferred Jesus, chose him. He was the appointed one, and his brothers were envious. But notice, God was with him. They sold him into slavery. God delivered him out of all the trouble, whether it be trouble by being in Potiphar's house and honoring God being there. And then Joseph was accused of trying to have sexual relations with Potiphar's wife, but that was a lie. She came on to him. He was an honorable man. Like, look, I have everything in your husband's house except you. Now, I'm not going to dishonor you, him, or God. He ended up in jail. God delivered him out of jail, and he became the vice regent there in Egypt. And God gave him great wisdom. There was a great famine, and Egypt had food because of the wisdom that Joseph gave to the Pharaoh. And that, listen, good point for you employees. You should pray that God blesses the places you work with. We learned that from the life of Joseph. We learned that from the life of Daniel. That these people who they worked for were blessed because one of God's kids was working for them. Even though Pharaoh, by all accounts, wasn't a godly man, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't a godly man. You can dispute that about some of the stuff in the book of Daniel. But God blessed these people because of the presence and the wisdom that God gave to his children who were there. But it's amazing. He rehearses the whole story. That Jacob and all of the family of Israel ended up in Egypt because Joseph was there. And And God took care of them. And notice it says in verse 16 that they carried the body of Jacob back to be buried where Abraham was buried as well. So see what Stephen is doing is he keeps showing them, look, God is speaking and using our people outside of this land. And yeah, they buried Jacob here, but God used Joseph in Egypt. God spoke to Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia. She's trying to show them that they're focused on the temple when God can speak anywhere. And they are focused on being right. But listen, Joseph was rejected. The patriarchs didn't honor Joseph, but he was the one who God was with.